I serve the Flaming Fist!
The Flaming Fist has a fairly long history when it comes to Baldur's Gate, both in the city itself in terms of tabletop, but also the original Baldur's Gate game first published in 1998. And by now, you're probably somewhat aware of the Flaming Fist, the guardians and protectors of the city of Baldur's Gate, but there's a lot more to this group than the role of simple police force. More than this, the Flaming Fist was once one of the best-known, most expensive mercenary companies in all of Faerun. Some would argue, one of the most efficient and effective as well. It's no secret that we will have extensive dealings with the Flaming Fist in Baldur's Gate 3, as we already encountered them outside of the city of Baldur's Gate in early access. So, it's a safe assumption that once we enter the city proper, they will become a major component of the game, and we won't be able to avoid them. Indeed, it might be to our best advantage to get into their good graces in an effort to gain allies against the Absolute. Either way, they'll be playing an important role. Of this I'm sure. To this end, I thought it'd be a useful idea to cover the history, organization, and politics of the Flaming Fist, so we can all know who we're dealing with once the game is released. The Flaming Fist was first founded over 160 years ago in the 1330s DR by Elton, an accomplished warrior and then Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate. The initial intention behind it was purely mercantile, and indeed, the organization was called the Flaming Fist Mercenary Company in full. In the first few decades of its existence, Grand Duke Elton would hire out members for important causes, and usually those causes were causes he deemed important for his own political power, as well as the growth of the company. Some early examples of deployment were when the nation of Tether became regentless in the mid-14th century DR. Grand Duke Elton sent out Flaming Fist units at a highly discounted rate, likely to make inroads into the Tetherian court and make allies. And later, 300 members of the Flaming Fist Company in the 1360s were hired for the purposes of combating the Tugan Horde in Sembia, a massive invasion at the time on the part of the Tugan people from the steppes that lie between Faerun and the far distant eastern realm of Kara-Tur. None of this, of course, was based on charity, and from its inception, the Flaming Fist was most thoroughly a mercenary company that soldiered for coin under the directive of Grand Duke Elton. But the Grand Duke was not solely motivated by lining his pockets, and he carried with him a sense of local patriotism to the city of Baldur's Gate. In fact, inspired by the city's founder, Baldur, Duke Elton sought out the final resting place of the legendary founder. To this end, he sent out a 150-man strong expedition to the southern jungles of Chult, but quickly redirected his efforts and those of the Flaming Fist to Mustika when Faerunian explorers discovered a new continent far to the west, and the company became involved in many mishaps and misadventures in this new world. During the latter half of the 14th century DR, after many prosperous ventures, the size of the Flaming Fist grew, and their reputation grew accordingly. For example, they helped defend the fortress city of Sundabar against an encroaching orc army, massive in size. What is likely of greatest interest to the Baldur's Gate 3 player is the conflict between the Flaming Fist and the infamous Saravak Anchev, Ballspawn and mastermind, behind a plot to plunge the city of Baldur's Gate into chaos. Saravak's machinations led to the infamous Iron Crisis on the Sword Coast, which nearly sparked a war between Baldur's Gate and the southern nation of Am, having been misled by clues placed by Saravak's henchmen and the Iron Throne. Additionally, Saravak had eliminated several of Baldur's Gate's dukes, positioning himself as the main candidate for Grand Duke in light of the now open vacancies he had created. After this election, he immediately appointed Angelo Dosen, a corrupt Flaming Fist officer, as Marshal of the Flaming Fist in an effort to fold the mercenary company into his power base, and who turned control of the Flaming Fist to Saravak after his appointment. If you've played Baldur's Gate, then you know that Saravak was eventually defeated. In the 15th century DR, none other than Abdel Adrian, the last Ballspawn and hero of the first two Baldur's Gate games, served as Marshal of the Flaming Fist, as well as one of the Council of Four until his death in 1479 DR, when he was succeeded by a now somewhat familiar figure, Uldur Ravengard, as Marshal and leader of the Flaming Fist. And by the end of the 15th century, approaching the time of Baldur's Gate 3, the Flaming Fist had largely been transformed into a police force and constabulary of the city of Baldur's Gate, and they are now allied with many important cities on the Sword Coast. Now, it should be clear that the Flaming Fist, as already stated several times, was founded as a band of mercenaries, operating on the principles of personal glory and coin, and to a much lesser extent, maintenance and promotion of law and order, as they had frequently been employed in such a capacity. So even as a police force in the city, in many ways they retain their roots and attitudes from their time as mercenaries. Since the company was founded in Baldur's Gate, the city is their main base of operations. But the Flaming Fist does have bases elsewhere in the realms. Now the Flaming Fists are the basic police force in Baldur's Gate, and they do their best to uphold the law and ferret out corruption, a tall order in a city as reputedly corrupt as Baldur's Gate. Their strict adherence to law and order is a boon in this regard, and the Flaming Fist is typically honest and forthright in their dealings. However, the flip side of this is that they are often merciless in their application of justice and enforcement of the law, very much embodying the principle of lawful neutral alignment, being much more concerned with rules than how much the rules benefit the common good. This does not mean that the Flaming Fist is incorruptible, and some members are susceptible to bribes, which makes some sense given that the company was founded as a mercenary group, and not all will act in honest ways. In terms of recruitment, most members of the Flaming Fist are actually Baldurians, having grown up in either the lower or outer cities. Occasionally, former criminals are given a chance to redeem themselves and are allowed to join the Flaming Fist. Unsurprisingly, men and women from economically disadvantaged backgrounds seeking stable wages and work are often motivated to join the Flaming Fist, as are many adventurers attracted by the reputation of the Fist. Naturally, lawful and disciplined types are most often recruited, as well as those with martial experience and physical prowess. Physical fitness requirements to join the Flaming Fist are stringent, and not everyone meets the established standards. Given how lawful the Flaming Fist is, the organization operates according to a strict military hierarchy. There are 6 official ranks, starting from the lowest to the highest: Fist, which corresponds to the private rank of soldier; Gauntlet, which is the equivalent of the rank of corporal; Manip, which correlates to sergeant; Flame, which is the equivalent of lieutenant rank; Blaze, which corresponds to major rank; and finally, Marshal, which is basically the Flaming Fist general, and the position of Older Ravenguard in the timeline of Baldur's Gate 3. Particularly when it comes to the lower city district of Baldur's Gate, the Flaming Fist has a lot of work to do to counter one of the city's primary sources of corruption and grift, the Guild, the somewhat uncreatively named criminal organization active in Baldur's Gate. Highly organized and extremely problematic, the Guild causes no end of trouble for the Flaming Fist, and Duke Ravengard once all but declared war on the Guild a decade prior to the events of Baldur's Gate 3. So expect to experience a lot more of them in Baldur's Gate 3 come full release. In addition, the Flaming Fist stands in stark opposition to evil organizations such as the Sahentrim and the Cult of the Dragon, the former of which we already know appears in the game in early access. Now when it comes to Baldur's Gate 3, I think it rather obvious that the Flaming Fists will play a very important role, not least of which because their Marshal, who is also a member of the ruling Council of 4, Duke Ravengard, has been kidnapped. Now my own theory is that the Duke has been implanted with a Netherese tadpole, but there's also the theory that the current Duke Ravengard is a doppelganger, which could be true as well. There's simply no way to get around the Flaming Fist in the city, as it's the constabulary of Baldur's Gate, and if Gortash's trailer is anything to go by, then it could be the case that he's been put in charge of them, and that Grand Duke Ravengard, whether real or not, has transferred authority to him. Whatever the ultimate plot of the main story ends up being, we can be sure that the Flaming Fist will somehow be part of it. But beyond that, I'm also convinced that they will be involved in many of the more minor quests of the city of Baldur's Gate. And who knows? It could be the case that in a similar fashion to Baldur's Gate 2, we can join factions, and the Flaming Fist will be one that we can join if we play our cards right, granting us new powers of authority and permission to do things we otherwise would not be able to do. What do you think about the Flaming Fist, and where do you think they'll fit into the story of Baldur's Gate? Would you like to be able to join them, oppose them? Let me know in the comment section. But before going, I'd like you to know that I have a Discord server for my subs to join and discuss Baldur's Gate 3 and all matters RPG, so I hope to see you there. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. And I will check you out next time. Take care.